there's no plate for you at this table." Those 6 words sliced through me sharper than any knife. My name's Ethan Parker, I was 24, and that night at my parents' house in Dallas, I realized I wasn't family anymore, at least not to them. It was supposed to be a celebration. My cousin's engagement dinner, catered, polished champagne glasses lined up in perfect rows. I had even shown up early, tie knotted, hair slicked back, trying to prove I belonged. But when I reached for a chair, my own mother's hand pressed down on the seat, blocking me. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "There's no plate for you." "Please don't make a scene." Laughter roared across the long oak table as if nothing had happened. Plates clattered, wine poured, forks scraped porcelain. Everyone was feasting, except me. I stood there, my throat tight, my fists clenched, trying to swallow the humiliation that burned hotter than the Texas heat outside. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My aunt smirked, and my mother just adjusted her pearl necklace like I wasn't even her son. It wasn't the first time they made me feel small. Growing up, my cousin was the golden child, the one they praised for every trophy, every promotion. Me? I was the dreamer, the disappointment who never fit their mold. But this was different. This was public erasure. I excused myself before anyone could see the tears pressing against my eyelids. Out on the porch, the cicadas buzzed in the summer night, and I made myself a promise under that sticky Texas sky. If they won't give me a plate, I'll build a whole damn table. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing. I'd never beg for a seat again. Looking back now, that was the night everything changed. That single moment of betrayal, being refused a place at my own family's table, lit a fire that would burn through years of struggle, sweat, and sacrifice. A fire that would eventually forge an empire. But back then, I was just Ethan. 24, broke, humiliated, and exiled from the people who were supposed to love me most. If you've ever been pushed aside, dismissed, or treated like you didn't matter, this story is for you. Because sometimes rejection isn't the end. It's the beginning of something bigger than you could ever imagine. And before I tell you how I went from being denied a plate to building a $75 million empire of restaurants, I just want to say, if you're new here, welcome. This channel is all about real family stories, full of betrayal, survival, and the twists life throws at us. If you find yourself hooked already, don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. Because trust me, the plate was just the beginning. I'll never forget the sound of the silverware clinking that night. It was supposed to be my cousin's engagement dinner, a gathering of family and close friends at my parents' house in Dallas. The dining room table had been extended with extra leaves, covered in a white linen cloth, crystal glasses catching the glow of the chandelier. 20 people sat shoulder to shoulder, plates piled with brisket, roasted vegetables, cornbread, laughter bouncing off the walls. Everyone had a seat, everyone but me. When I slid into an empty chair at the far end, my mother's hand came down firm on the backrest. Her face didn't even twitch. "Ethan, there's no plate for you at this table." The words dropped like lead. For a second, I thought maybe she was joking. But then I saw it. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapping the wood, her eyes cold, daring me to challenge her in front of everyone. My father shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. My aunt smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. And my cousin, the golden child, kept smiling for the camera as if nothing had happened. Heat rose up my neck, my ears ringing. I felt every gaze pressing down on me. Some cousins glanced away, pretending they hadn't heard. Others leaned back, whispering, hungry for drama. But nobody, not a single person, said, "Let him sit." I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. My chest tightened as if someone had tied ropes around my ribs. I muttered something, I don't even remember what, and stepped away from the table. Behind me, forks scraped plates, wine glasses clinked. The celebration went on, louder even, as though my absence was the unspoken requirement for their joy. I stood alone in the hallway, the smell of brisket and baked rolls taunting me, my stomach growling. I hadn't eaten all day, but the hunger in my gut was nothing compared to the hunger rising in my soul. That wasn't just a meal they denied me, it was a declaration. I didn't belong. For years, I'd been the afterthought. The dreamer with too many ideas, not enough discipline. The kid who never measured up to the cousin with the perfect grades, the six-figure job, the diamond ring flashing under the chandelier that night. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, it was the same script. Praise for her, silence for me. But this, blocking my seat, denying me a plate in front of everyone, wasn't silence. It was a verdict. I slipped outside to the porch, where the Texas night wrapped around me, heavy and humid. Cicadas buzzed like static in the trees. My hands shook as I gripped the railing, the wood splintering under my nails. Inside, laughter burst through the windows. My family feasted while I stood in the dark. Shame burned, yes, but beneath it something else stirred. Anger. Not the kind that makes you reckless, but the kind that sharpens you, forges you. I realized then that I could beg for scraps at their table for the rest of my life, or I could build a table so large, so undeniable, they'd one day stand in line just for a seat. That night, I walked home hungry. But I also walked home awake. The betrayal of being refused a plate in my own parents' house would haunt me for years. It would follow me into every job interview, every failed idea, every sleepless night. But eventually, it would also become the spark that lit the fire. And fire, when controlled, can build an empire. But at that moment, I didn't know about empires or chains of restaurants. I only knew the sting of rejection, and the vow I whispered to myself under that buzzing Texas sky. If they won't give me a seat, I'll build my own table. I thought the humiliation of that night would crush me. Instead, it hardened me. After the dinner, I picked up shifts wherever I could, washing dishes at a diner, bussing tables, even scrubbing grease traps until my clothes stank of fryer oil. I studied everything. How the cooks kept pace during rush hour, how the waitresses balanced 6 plates on one arm, how the managers smoothed over angry customers. It wasn't glamorous, it was survival. But in the clatter of plates and the hiss of grills, I began to see a future. I started dreaming bigger. If I could learn the business from the ground up, maybe one day I could own something of my own. Not just a restaurant, an empire, a table no one could push me away from. By the time I was 27, I scraped together enough savings, plus a risky bank loan, to rent a tiny storefront in a rundown strip mall. The sign out front was crooked, the paint peeling, but to me, it was a palace. I called it the Iron Skillet. Opening night, I cooked everything myself. Ribs, cornbread, collard greens. My best friend Jake served tables with a grin, while his wife handled the cash register. We only had 6 tables, but by the end of the week, word was spreading. Customers came back, bringing friends. For the first time in my life, people looked at me with respect. I was building my table. But success has a way of drawing shadows. One evening, after closing, I found a letter taped to the door. A polite rejection from a food supplier I'd been courting for weeks. They claimed I was too inexperienced, that I lacked the family stability to handle long-term contracts. I brushed it off at first, until the second supplier said the same thing, and the third, then came the whispers. Customers I'd never met muttered about me being unreliable. A landlord hinted my lease might not be renewed. And one night, Jake pulled me aside, his brow furrowed. "Ethan, man, somebody's out there poisoning your name." At first, I thought he meant competitors, but then he showed me a message he'd intercepted by accident, an email forwarded to a vendor, signed with a name I knew too well. It was my own aunt, the same woman who smirked at me the night I was denied a plate. The message dripped with venom disguised as concern. "We worry about Ethan. He's unstable. Always chasing ideas. It would be safer not to tie your business to his." I read the words over and over, my hands trembling, but the dagger didn't twist until I scrolled further down. The email thread included my mother. Her response was short, but final. "Please don't encourage him. This restaurant is just another phase. Better he fails quickly than drags it out. I dropped the phone. The screen clattered against the tiles. So that was it. Not only had they refused me a plate, they were sabotaging the table I was trying to build. I sat on the kitchen floor of my little restaurant, the smell of grease still clinging to the walls, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. My own blood, the people who raised me, were cutting strings behind the curtain, hoping I would collapse. For hours I couldn't move. Shame, anger, grief, they all fought inside me. The humiliation of that first betrayal came rushing back, now joined by this second, deeper wound. But then Jake's voice cut through the fog. "Ethan, listen to me. You've got two choices. You let them win, or you prove them wrong. Which is it gonna be?" His words hung in the air like a challenge. I closed my eyes and saw that night again, the chandelier, the laughter, the empty chair, my mother's cold voice. "There's no plate for you at this table." I clenched my fists, feeling a strange calm settle in. "No," I whispered, "I'm not done." That became my pivot point. I tightened operations, leaned on loyal customers, and worked double shifts. I learned to source ingredients directly, cutting out suppliers who turned me away. I sold my car to keep the lights on. Every obstacle became fuel, every rumor another reason to fight. And slowly, the tide began to turn. The iron skillet filled up night after night, even with duct tape on the seats and flickering lights above. Local food bloggers wrote about us. A magazine photographer snapped pictures of my ribs and called them Dallas's hidden gem. One evening, as I locked up, I caught my reflection in the glass door. For the first time, I didn't see the humiliated boy denied a plate. I saw a man forging something unstoppable. That night, I wrote it in my journal, underlined twice. If they tried to starve me out, they only fed the fire. Little did I know that fire was about to spread far beyond a six-table diner. When you've already been starved at your family's table and stabbed in the back by their whispers, there's not much left to fear. That realization hit me one night, wiping down counters at the iron skillet long after midnight. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. My hands ached, my eyes burned, but my mind was razor sharp. I thought of those emails, of my mother's words, "Better he fails quickly than drags it out." That was supposed to be my ending. Instead, it became my ignition. I flipped open my leather notebook, the same one I used to sketch menus, and scribbled across the page, "They want me to fail, so I'll build something they can't ignore." That vow changed everything. The next morning, I called Jake and his wife into the tiny back office. I slapped down a napkin where I'd scrawled numbers in pen. "We're not just running a diner anymore," I told them. "We're building a brand." They looked at me like I'd lost it, but then Jake grinned. "Hell, I'm in." From then on, the Iron Skillet wasn't just a place to eat. It was a story. Our story. I posted on local forums, sharing how we started with 6 tables and a dream. Customers resonated. They weren't just buying ribs, they were buying resilience. And slowly, resilience paid. By year 3, we opened a second location on the east side of Dallas. This one had 12 tables, a neon sign that actually worked, and lines out the door. Local news ran a segment calling us the underdog diner defying the odds. I remember standing in the new kitchen the night it opened, apron stained with sauce, hearing the anchor's words echo on the TV mounted in the corner. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt since childhood, pride. Of course my family noticed. One afternoon, as I was hauling boxes into the stockroom, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We heard about your second restaurant. Congratulations. Maybe you're finally settling down." I stared at the screen, the sarcasm bleeding through every word. My aunt chimed in days later, asking if she could help manage my new branch. I laughed bitterly. The same people who'd once branded me unstable now wanted a piece of what they couldn't destroy. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Success was my answer, but success demanded sacrifice. I barely slept, chasing down investors by day and chopping onions by night. I maxed out credit cards, begged landlords for extra weeks on rent, and poured every cent back into the business. There were days I thought I'd collapse right on the line, sweat pouring into the skillet. Yet each time exhaustion screamed, I heard that voice again. There's no plate for you at this table. That humiliation became my fuel. The breakthrough came when a well-known Dallas food critic stumbled into our East Side location one Friday. She ordered the ribs, then the cornbread, then stayed for dessert. I didn't even know who she was until the review hit the paper 2 days later. A diner that tastes like home but feels like victory. The iron skillet is not just food, it's redemption on a plate. Those words changed everything. Lines tripled overnight. Investors called. By 31, I was signing papers for our 5th location. At 33, we had 10. Every new grand opening felt like another nail sealing the coffin of my family's narrative about me. Still, the memories haunted me. One evening, after locking up the newest branch in Austin, I stood in the empty dining room staring at the long row of polished tables. For a moment, I saw myself at 24 again, standing in my parents' dining room with no plate, no voice, no worth. I whispered into the empty room, "Look now." I built my own table, and the silence answered back with a kind of peace I'd never known. Of course, not everyone found peace in my success. Rumors circled again, this time not about me failing, but about me getting too big for my britches. Some relatives muttered that I was flaunting my money, that I'd forgotten where I came from. But the truth? I hadn't forgotten. I remembered every slight, every dismissal. That memory was the foundation under every brick I laid. And when Forbes called for an interview about the man behind Dallas's fastest-growing restaurant chain, I didn't hesitate. During the interview, the journalist asked what motivated me. I leaned back, smiled faintly, and said the line that would end up as their headline, "I was refused a plate once. Now I build tables big enough for thousands." By 35, the Iron Skillet wasn't just a chain. It was a movement. We had 20 locations across Texas, with whispers of expansion into California and New York. The empire was forming. But deep down, I knew this story wasn't finished. Because empires don't just rise, they eventually confront the ghosts of the past. And mine was waiting with my last name. By the time I turned 38, the Iron Skillet wasn't just a diner chain. It was an empire. $75 million in valuation, 35 locations across Texas, with our first flagship opening in Manhattan. I stood in the middle of the Fifth Avenue restaurant on opening night, staring at the black marble floors, the chandeliers dripping light across polished tables, the air thick with the scent of smoked brisket and rosemary bread. It was everything my parents' dining room wasn't, and for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about survival, I was thinking about legacy. The New York Times had already run a feature calling me the boy without a plate who fed the nation. Forbes named me to their 40 under 40. Investors hovered like moths to flame. Cameras flashed as guests poured in, celebrities and critics taking selfies with the Iron Skillet logo behind them. I should have felt untouchable. But ghosts don't vanish just because you build empires. Halfway through the evening, as the jazz band played softly in the corner, I saw them. My parents. My mother in a sequined dress, my father stiff in a suit that didn't fit. And trailing behind, my aunt, her lips pressed in that same tight smirk I remembered from Dallas. My stomach dropped. For a second, I was 24 again, standing in their dining room, hearing those 6 words, "There's no plate for you at this table." But then I blinked, and the scene shifted. This wasn't their table anymore. It was mine. A hostess approached me nervously. "Mr. Parker, there's a couple asking for a table, but they don't have a reservation. They say they're your family." I took a breath, smoothing my tie. The old me would have panicked. The boy inside me still wanted to shrink, but the man, the CEO, the builder of a $75 million empire? He walked to the door. "Ethan," my mother breathed, reaching for my hand as though nothing had happened. "We're so proud of you. This place is magnificent." I looked at her fingers, manicured as ever, and remembered them pressing down on the back of my chair years ago, blocking me, erasing me. My father cleared his throat. "We thought maybe you could seat us. Just for tonight. We want to celebrate with you." My aunt added quickly, "It'll look good, for the press. Family reunited." A redemption story. Her words dripped with calculation, not love. For a moment I almost laughed. After years of sabotage, whispers, and cold shoulders, here they were, trying to claim a plate at my table. I leaned in, voice low but steady. "Do you remember what you said to me that night? Do you remember the exact words?" My mother's eyes flickered. She looked away. I didn't wait for her to answer. I said it for her. "There's no plate for you at this table." The words landed like a gavel. Gasps rippled through the waiting staff nearby. My aunt flushed crimson. My father's jaw tightened. But I wasn't done. I gestured to the packed dining room behind me, journalists, actors, politicians, everyday New Yorkers laughing over my food. "Do you see this? Every single table in this empire exists because you denied me one. You thought starving me would kill me. All you did was feed the fire." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We were wrong. We admit it. Isn't that enough?" I shook my head slowly. "No. You don't get to erase years of betrayal with a reservation." The hostess looked at me, unsure what to do. I straightened my shoulders. "Seat them if there's space. But not because they're my family. Tonight they're just customers." The room seemed to exhale as the hostess led them away, not to the center, not to the spotlight, but to a small table near the back. For once, they weren't in control, and for once, I didn't feel like I owed them anything. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the cameras cooled, I slipped outside into the crisp Manhattan night. Neon lights reflected in puddles on the street, the city buzzing with life. I thought of Dallas, of cicadas in the humid dark, of a boy whispering a vow into the sky. "If they won't give me a seat, I'll build my own table." That boy had kept his promise, and as I watched taxis stream past, I realized something even bigger. The empire wasn't built to prove them wrong anymore. It was built to prove me right, to prove that worth isn't handed out on plates by others. It's forged when you decide you'll never starve again. At the after-party, a journalist cornered me with a glass of champagne in hand. "Ethan, tell me the moment you knew you'd made it." I thought for a long second, then smiled. It wasn't tonight. It wasn't the Forbes list or the New York Times article. It was the night I watched my parents take a seat at one of my restaurants, and for the first time, I didn't care whether they were proud or not. That was the moment I knew I'd won. And with that, the empire wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. Freedom from their voices, freedom from their table, freedom to build something bigger than betrayal. The flagship in New York stayed open long after the cameras left, but the memory that sticks with me isn't the photo shoots, the articles, or the investors clinking glasses. It's a simple Sunday night, months later. I was back in Dallas, not at my parents' house, but in one of my own restaurants. We'd closed early. The lights were warm, the tables pushed together in one long row. Around that table sat the people who had walked through fire with me. Jake and his wife, the cooks who stuck by me when money was thin, the servers who believed in the vision, friends who had become family. Plates were full, glasses raised, laughter carried across the room like music. And as I looked down that row of faces, I realized something. This was the table I'd been searching for all my life. Not the one in my parents' dining room, not the one I was denied at 24, but the one I built, where no one would ever be told, "There's no plate for you here." The lesson was clear. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who stay when the lights are off and the doors are locked. Sometimes it's the ones who see you hungry and don't let you starve. I thought my empire was about proving my parents wrong, but standing in that restaurant, hearing my chosen family laugh, I knew it was about something greater, proving that love, loyalty, and hard work can turn betrayal into abundance. The boy who once walked home hungry now fed thousands. And the man he became finally felt full. If you've ever been pushed aside, if you've ever felt like you didn't belong at someone else's table, let this be your reminder. You can build your own. Bigger, brighter, stronger. And if this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to join me here. This channel is where we share family stories of betrayal, of redemption, of the unexpected twists that shape who we become. So if you'd like to hear more, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me, what table are you building for yourself? Because at the end of the day, the most powerful empire isn't built on money. It's built on the people you choose to share a plate with.